Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
I'll work on guruism, which I hadn't known was part of my assignment. I actually am responsible here at the Palisades for high-level strategy and low-level humor, and we'll try to do a little bit of both in the next 2 days. I'd like to personally welcome you here as participants rather than audience. We're going to be talking for 2 days about total customer experiences. My role is going to be to try to get everyone who is using the same vocabulary close to using the same dictionary. What is an experience? What is value? What are emotions? What are feelings? And to introduce you to a deconstruction of a very touchy-feely term, experience, in terms that will allow for business people to make sound decisions on an investment in creating an experience that results in sustainable customer preference. We have a series of experts, many of whom are sitting in the audience. Valerie Zeithamel from Duke University, who is a leading expert in service management, will be talking about some of the issues and approaches to measuring an intangible like experience. We have Lou Carbone, who has developed a methodology for implementing an experience. We have people from Doylestown and Ron Massini and a gentleman from the Bank of America who are engaged in creating these experiences, and you will learn from their practical experience. So we have a spectrum from theory to practice to learnings, and we've asked each of the presenters to state their point of view or their experience or their knowledge, and then lead a discussion so that we can learn from each other, because it's people in the trenches that are going to be giving us the most practical value as we jointly learn how to understand and exploit the potential of total experience management. So this is the story. If we are looking seriously at what a customer's experience is, then we have to understand its relationship to value. And I'm about to make the case that if we truly understand the dimensions of experience, it should become the value proposition of our organization to our customers. Now let's start with thinking about the customer, the poor customer. What is that entity that makes choices in the marketplace that are either for or against our interests? How do they make decisions about whether to do business with us or do business with someone else? Well, the first thing they do is use their brains to figure out your products and services comparable, better, or not as good as your competitors. These are the rational values. Those are the functions of the products and services that they evaluate. In doing that, we are concerned about what customers know about us and our products. And in their evaluation, they are using that part of their brain, the neocortex primarily, that is wired to do analytic thinking. There's another part of the brain that is extremely important. As a matter of fact, recent research at Harvard and other places in neuroscience indicates that it's substantially more important than the analytic circuitry in our brain, and it's the part that is concerned about emotional values. That's not so much how we think about products and services and companies, but how we feel about those products and services and that company. And this uses a completely different set of circuitry, actually not completely different, it's intermingled. And those are circuits that are basically in the limbic system and that end up giving us a feeling about this product, the service, the company. You put all of these together and you've got the total customer experience. And in order to manage the total customer experience, you have to consider and manage each of these disparate elements. And you have to do it in a holistic way so that it comes across as a net takeaway emotional feeling that incorporates the functional values and that lead to a decision, I'm going to continue to relate and do business with this company or I'm not. Now let's start the deconstruction, and let's start from where most of us began, and that's with the company that makes products. What's a product? A product is a tool, and it's a means to an end. And we know how to value a product. We go to the hardware store, and we find out a hammer is worth $13.50 and a screwdriver is worth $8.50. No big issues there. But the key is that the product is itself a means to an end. And that end, of course, is what you do with it. And doing something with products to produce a result is called a service. Now, you're going to get impatient with me by giving you this abecedarian explanation of products and services, but allow me to share with you the fact that it took IBM 20 years to figure this out. In the 1960s, IBM's tagline was IBM means service. We did not charge for it. We gave it away, quote unquote. We had systems engineers who spent their entire time with customers. We gave away the software. We installed the equipment. We fixed it when it was wrong. And we thought of service as a cost, an expense actually, that was necessary to sell our products. And when we unbundled our business in 1968 and started to separately price for software and for services, we had no idea that we were starting 3 new industries: the leasing industry, the consulting industry, and the software industry. And for 20 years, we looked at service, again, as something we had to do in order to sell products, but not to manage as a business. Yeah, we priced for it, but this was not a business for IBM. This didn't have 60% margins. This was manpower intensive. Ugh. So it wasn't until the early 1990s that IBM realized that the service incorporates the products, and the business case for service needs to incorporate all of the values that are functional from the product point of view as well as the service point of view. That is important because we're now about to go to the next stage of value. Service itself is a means to an end. And what is that end? That end is the total experience. And that experience adds to the functional values the emotional values that come largely from the environment. The people and things in the environment as you learn about, purchase, use, get serviced, pay for the product or service that you have signed up for. And if we don't watch ourselves, we'll start thinking about experience as another way of selling our products or our services, rather than as the larger value that incorporates the product or service values. So let's now start talking about customer value. How many people have used the term customer value at least once in the last week? How many would be willing to bet more than $100 that any 2 definitions in this room of customer value would be the same? Okay, so collectively we don't know what we're talking about yet, as I understand. But what is customer value? What does somebody offer what they think customer value means? You realize what you're saying while you're silent, I assume here. What is customer value?
I normally use a definition of the Harvard Business Services interest group that relates to the results that the customers are needing with the quality of the process minus all the costs, the direct cost, the price, and also the acquisition costs. It's a comparison between both. So in this way you create value.
That's actually a very good definition. It's the benefits that the customers receive minus the cost of the firm to produce it. We call that actually the waterfall. And organizations that are designed around making that waterfall as tall as possible are designed around customer value, value to the customer. But there's another school that talks about customer value in terms of lifetime value of the customer and in terms of loyalty. In other words, they talk about customer value as the value of the customer to the firm, which is a completely different concept. So for purposes today, we're going to be talking about Claudio's customer value. And that is the value that the firm produces and delivers to the customer. And we're going to talk about that as the design point of the firm, the reward for which is shareholder value and motivated employees and all of the other constituents being happier than they were before. But the design point is the value that we produce through the experience. So here's the information that this may not be new news. In 1996, Morris Holbrook, who is a professor at Columbia University, wrote in a very interesting treatise on value in general. And his conclusion was that all of our products and services are means to an experience. An experience is the carrier of value for human beings. So you don't have a value outside of the subjective assessment, and it is subjective, of the feeling that the experience with products and services bring you. So customer value is carried by the experience, says Morris. But in 1955, they were already on this in the academic world. What people really desire, says Mr. Abbott, or Professor Abbott, are not products, but satisfying experiences. People want products because they want the experience-bringing services which they hope the products will render. So this gentleman had that means-end series firmly in mind as early as 50 years ago. So we can't really tell you that this is new news, but we can tell you that it's a very interesting observation that for 50 years, nobody has translated that knowledge into a business, a systematic way of making decisions about creating the experience. So now that we've talked about value, what is an experience? What is an experience? Well, we're going to talk about an experience as a set of emotions that aggregate into a feeling. An experience is, to use the title of a book, really excellent book by Tony Damasio, the feeling of what happens. It is the aggregate feeling that we have after the sum of all interactions, and that feeling is a dynamic one, and it changes and is modulated based on every subsequent encounter with the company. So it's an ongoing state rather than a one-time state. Now, if we, did I go too far with this? I thought, oh, I went way down. Let's see, sorry. This is the way in which feelings are different from emotions. Emotions are the physiological response of our bodies to our environment. If you have the emotion of fear, then blood is sent to your legs so that you can run. And they have measured the states in your brain and the physiological states that are associated with a variety of emotions. Feelings are what emerges after you become aware of this change of state in your body. And so feelings are, in many cases, the combinations of emotions. Comfort is a combination of joy and acceptance. Frustration, a combination of anger and anticipation. Delight, of surprise and joy. And there are other emotions that are built from triads. Other feelings that are built from triads of these emotions. So the idea of picking a single emotion or a single feeling is an overly simplistic way of understanding what you have to do to design the interactions of your senses in every encounter with a business in such a way that the result is a coherent experience, and it's an experience in the form of a feeling that you as a manufacturer or a producer or a service provider have intended that the user experience. So that is a distinction between experience and emotion, and I guess the reason it's important is this. Jerry Zaltman at Harvard, who teaches a really wondrous course in his MBA, in the second year MBA program up there, that is heavily oriented to how the mind of the consumer works, has done research that shows very convincingly that your customers make decisions primarily on the basis of the total experience, and that those decisions are much more predictable if you understand their reaction to the total experience than if you understand their reactions to individual products or services. So that makes it a business issue, which makes it important to recognize that we're not suggesting that you start giving your customers a total experience, because you already do, because you can't not give the customer a total experience. Customers are always summing up how they feel about this bank, or about this computer company, or about this product organization. The issue is, are we systematically designing all of the signals and integrating and orchestrating them in a way that leads to an aggregate takeaway feeling that captures the experience and evokes the experience that we're trying to deliver as a value proposition? How do we do that? That's what these 2 days are about. Lou is going to, in the last half of the morning, talk about a systematic way of integrating and orchestrating the entire experience. And then we're going to hear from people who have actually used this technique and some other techniques to bring about a designed experience. One way we would suggest you don't do this is what we call the bolt-on theory. That's going back to the idea that services is there to sell products. Don't bolt on what's called sensory marketing to your existing business and expect for long-lasting achievements. Who are some examples of people who have tried this? Well, take Nike Town. Those wondrous stores down there that you go in and you really do have a sensory overload of lights and music and sounds, not integrated with, but kind of a a separate experience from the experience of picking out shoes or clothing items. You go to a charming restaurant in the Mall of America called Rainforest. Anybody been to the Rainforest Cafe? And you sit there and you hear and see rain. But that's a set of emotional clues that have nothing to do with, you're not eating rainforest food and you're not talking to rainforest denizens. It's a separate paste on, and it's therefore pretty easy to knock off. Successful as it is, it doesn't take a heck of a lot to reproduce that. Another example of a company that did that was Planet Hollywood. How many of you have been to a Planet Hollywood? How long were you there, by the way? Anybody last longer than 2 hours? Now, that's a design point, by the way, of Planet Hollywood. Was a design point of Planet Hollywood. They were bringing these movies to you and very loud sound to do two things. One was to present a set of visual stimuli that would allow them to charge $2 more for an otherwise undifferentiated cheeseburger served in an otherwise undifferentiated way. And they had the volume that high because they wanted you out of there in 2 hours to turn the tables. That was part of their business model. And it was, again, totally unintegrated with the product or the service. So the short-term gains of these can sometimes be quite significant, but it's very difficult to sustain, and it's very difficult to differentiate over a long period of time with this idea of sensory marketing. One of the real good examples, however, of the use of sensory marketing, I think Lou was the one that told me this, that one of the malls in the United States was having a great deal of trouble getting teens out of the mall at 10 o'clock at night. And their solution was to play Bach over the loudspeakers at 10 o'clock, and that wiped them out like you wouldn't believe. Same thing that in reverse is why I don't go to the malls during the day. We're going to be talking about integrating all of the sensory inputs that you get in the course of interactions with a company and its products and its services with the design of the service itself and the design of the product. And when you do that, you have to consider the way in which all of those clues are selected and aligned to produce a coherent and a consistent takeaway net feeling. Now I want to decompose the elements of an experience, because this is terminology and concepts that you'll hear through the rest of the program today. And here are the basic building blocks of an experience. The first is what we call a motif. This is the name that we give to the takeaway feeling that we want to evoke in the customer. And it is the short phrase like comfort or excitement or I feel at home. That characterizes the comment that you'd like or the answer you'd like to a question. If you ask somebody after an encounter with your business, what did you think about that encounter? This encapsulates that phrase. And that becomes the design point by which clues are selected for integration with other clues to produce a result. There are two fundamental types of clues, and then there are some subcategories of those. The first category are the rational value clues. That is, did the product perform to spec? Did the service perform to spec? Did the window washer clean the windows? Did the lawnmower start when you pulled the starter cord? And then there are the emotional clues. These are the reactions to two types of stimuli. Mechanics, which are signals emitted by things in the environment, and humanics, which are signals emitted by the people in the environment. So people can emit two kinds of clues. One are the humanics, that's the tone of voice, that's the smile, and the other kind of clue is the service clue. The windows are clean, the hair got cut, the dishes got washed. Things in the environment, the products in the environment, also emit two kinds of clues. One is the functional clues. The razor did shave. The car did start. And the other kinds of clues are the sound of the car door closing and the smell of the leather. And these are what we call mechanics. So we're differentiating in two ways, one by function versus emotion, and then secondly, within the atmospheric clues, the environmental clues, those that are sent out by things and those that are sent out by people. Everybody got that? Here's the third and final piece of the deconstruction. And this is the framework, or the blueprint, as Lou calls it, by which the clues are, number one, selected, and number two, integrated with each other into a systematic design, a systemic design, a holistic design that results in the motif. So the motif acts as the guidepost for selection or deselection of the individual clues. And it's during this process that investment decisions are made. Each clue not only is tested for consistency with the motif, but also for impact. What does it take operationally to create it, and what is its net contribution to the overall experience? So that's the decomposition. If everybody got that clear in their heads, because we're about to have a pop quiz here. I'm now going to show you a 3-minute film, and the film is full of clues, and what I want you to do is watch it very carefully and take notes. What clues do you pick up, and what do you think they're contributing to the overall experience? And we call this a draining experience for reasons that will soon become obvious. Takes a while for this to...
Go trouble down the drain for a rooter.
For Alan Wilk, that is not just a corny song.
Well, treating a customer is like I would like to be treated.
It's an anthem.
Isn't that lovely?
When the unspeakable happens,
That's what we call a sewer backup.
Alan comes to the rescue,
Put on a nice long glove and
providing the kind of service you might expect from your valet,
see what's down here.
but hardly from a drain cleaner in Queens, New York.
When I come to a customer's house, their problem is it's like my house.
He's the perfect house guest,
I hooked up my hose and washed out that pit for you so it won't smell too bad.
cleaning up messes he didn't even make.
But I got
He feeds your dog.
no make crumbs.
He even smells nice.
That's just some cologne. Which you saw sometimes this work does get dirty sometimes.
For Alan, no detail is too small if it means keeping the customer satisfied.
When I'm finished with a job, the customer may see if I'm finished, and then I do just one extra thing, like the extra cleaning up. They didn't expect that. So, what did it cost? A few minutes extra time?
And he'll do anything to get to a job faster than the next guy.
That 5 minutes that you wasted may have been the 5 minutes that another company got there before you.
Never needing to stop for directions.
Very often you may not know exactly where that call is.
For a drink.
I don't even have to stop. I can just pull a drink train.
Or even for a bathroom.
I have my own facilities.
And Alan always wants to look his best.
Just last Friday night, I had a job where I was down in this pit, for about 4 hours underneath this house, and boy, did I get dirty. So I got undressed, took a shower.
This is
The next
unbelievable.
customer never knew how dirty I was.
This is absolutely unbelievable.
She loves me, she loves me not.
After 18 and a half years as a roto-rooter man,
Here's that missing sock you've been looking for all winter.
knows his customers. Do you view it as part of your job to sort of ease their mind as well as fix their drain?
I think I do that subconsciously. I know what they're going through, and I know what it's like to be on the end of the surface. So I try to empathize with how they're feeling. They're concerned only with their problem, not kind of the day I'm having.
Alan has something special. And that makes his work special too.
Alan is well rewarded for his remarkable attitude. He makes about $70,000 a year.
I think a lot of workers miss the boat. They're looking at the dollar. Money isn't everything. Okay, see you in 6 months. You do your job better than you are expected to do it. That money will follow because you're going to be wanted wherever you go.
And wherever he goes,
Now we're ready for some heavy lifting.
he stands as a symbol of hope.
What evil has befallen you tonight?
Good service has not gone completely down the drain.
Okay. Let me blank this for a minute. What are some of the clues that you saw? Claudia, I'm glad you came today. I really, really am glad you came today.
The one thing that is really interesting is that they are only concerned about the problem, because one thing that he started with is what is the problem of the customer, how to fix it. This is one thing, and the other thing is he tried to recover the situation to the zero time.
To zero
He clean
time.
it up, all those, the bad odors out, etc., etc.
So
he's
two of the
trying
clues.
things.
Yeah.
They have a big problem. He fix it up. He focus on this. They don't want to hear nothing about other things. And the other thing is try to recover the situation to zero time.
So short time. So two clues where the problem got fixed, and secondly, it didn't take him long to do it. Right? Is that?
No.
No?
When he cleaned up all the things,
Yeah?
he used this.
Okay.
He tried to recover the situation
Oh,
before nothing happened.
so what he did was to
Not only to fix the
spray cleaning agent and
Yes.
deodorant.
Normally, when these people come to your house, after that, you should clean the carpet,
Yeah.
paint the walls.
So he did extra cleanup.
Yes.
Holly?
Well, this is interesting because I just had this happen to my house. Where
Oh, really?
A plumber, a roto-rooter kind of guy, come in, so it's kind of his home. He just goes above and beyond the call of duty. You know, not only does he get the job done, he takes the time in his own personal hygiene and appearance.
Personal hygiene.
People have a traditional plumber stereotype in their mind, and he breaks that.
So what are the things, what are the appearance things? Help me with some of the clues that,
No,
so his cologne, right?
he smells fresh.
What else did you notice about his appearance? What? Shoe shine. What else?
He had a nice long glove.
He had a nice long glove. What did that tell you? What did that?
He was protecting himself and he was keeping it clean.
All right.
He's clean. He takes a
He's
shower
clean.
if he gets
So personal hygiene, cleanliness. Other clues, yes, Stan.
He used humor and he had a kind of an upbeat demeanor. Because people are not happy when their drains back up. And he was like, here's your lock, the sock you've been looking for years.
Yeah.
And he was always upbeat and cheerful.
Yeah, now, that's an interesting. Let's remember. Let's hold this sock thing because that was funny and that was a important part of the clues that he sends out. Right? Yeah.
There's just one to go with that. There's an article I read that denotes that there are 21 different social functions of laughter or humor. And so humor in context, once again, is an appropriate thing because depending on someone's perspective, it may be breaking in the midst of everything going wrong in my life, or my wife yelling at me in the house, and I don't necessarily care for your humor.
Yeah.
But overall, the other one I got was that his whole experience design was premium, so you don't focus on pricing. Because
What made it premium? What made it premium?
Everything that he focused on. Everything from the beginning of how do you acquire the service to the disposal for when you leave that took away whatever issues you might have.
Give me I'm trying to get the actual clues that you would design and plant. So response time, this is.
To pet care.
So the pet care.
Right. It was
Okay.
to the sensory cues of smell and vision.
What were some of the smell cues?
Well, his deodorant
His
usage. and
cologne?
which, who knows if it's Old Spice or High Karate.
Greg, were you? No, Shanda.
Yeah, I think important thing in this particular film was that this was a total solution of a problem. It was not a particular product or the service, but I think the customers were happy because he provided a complete satisfaction, and their overall experience was very, very good with this gentleman. So that is why he was receiving more calls.
Well, let's dig a little deeper now. What we've talked about are some different kinds of clues. These clues are service clues. They're the functional clues. And he did extra things. He fed the dog. He cleaned up afterwards. He found the sock. He did those. Those are things that added to the dimension of the fundamental service. Here are some clues that were, well, you tell me, what's this category of clues? Personal hygiene, cleanliness, cologne, shine shoes, pressed pants, long glove. What kind of clues are those? Well, in terms of the terminology that is used, those are the mechanics, because these are all things. This is one of, that you picked up, a humanic. This is Alan, being Alan and using humor, the tone of voice. What are some of the other humanics? He sings, yeah, he sings. Dan, did you want to?
He was empathetic to the situation. He took on their problem.
Now that's an interesting attribute, empathy. Did everybody agree that one of the clues that he continued to send out was empathy? I mean, he actually said it himself, didn't he, in one of these? So empathy. Now, if empathy is what he was sending out, what do you think the motif? Well, before we get to the motif is, what was the product? Claudia?
There's no not product. It's a solution. It's a service.
Well, that's a service. He's got a clean drain, so that's
But
the
he's
service.
not selling a car.
What's the product?
He's selling a solution.
That's right. That's what he's saying.
Solution to a need.
He's even selling an experience, right?
Yes.
But what's the product?
Fixed plumbing.
What?
Fixed plumbing. Or
That's the result. That's an outcome. That's a service outcome. Now, come on. We all grew up in product companies. This is what we base our businesses on, folks. Let's find the product here. That's it. The router. That's what made this company great. The router, the snake, as they call it, on which they have a patent, because this snake, when you put it down through the ground and it goes outside under the yard and it encounters a root of a tree, can cut through the tree. And that is what makes the Roto-Rooter product unique, and that is what Roto-Rooter built their business on. They still think, many of them still do, that they are in the product business, because that's the key to the kingdom. But what did the customer think? What was the customer's takeaway? And she used the words herself about the entire experience. What did she call it?
She commented that because the service was, the experience was so special, what he delivered was special.
That's the word, special. It says Alan is special, and that makes his work special. And that is the kind of thing that might show up as a motif. So now we got, let's say this wasn't, certainly Roto-Rooter did not design it this way, but if special was their design point, and if they found an Alan, how would they institutionalize Allenness in their business? If they wanted to make their business the business of delivering special, a feeling of specialness, and they happen to have these assets of a service organization and a special Roto-Rooter product, how are you going to scale this up and proliferate it so that everybody who encounters Roto-Rooter ends up feeling special? How are you going to do that? How would you do that? Yes, Madeline.
It's how you hire people and the flexibility you give them to play off their talents for personality.
And the kind of people you hire. Can you think of an example of somebody who hires that way? Hires for the way with which people send out humanics? Ritz-Carlton? Disney? Disney even calls it what? Casting, right? Not hiring. Southwest Airlines? Now, what do you do? So now let's look at this. This is now we're talking about having someone play a role, right? We want people to learn how to play Alan roles. So now you are teaching somebody not just how to use the product, and not just how to clean a drain, and not just how to say, have a good day, and not just to smile, but you're teaching them how to behave like Alan does. Now, do you think Alan finds a sock every time he goes to a new client, new customer? This is the IBM way of thinking, folks, and we'll put this over on the side. Your data's a mess, and we're going to fix it for you. Do you think Alan finds the moral equivalent of a sock every time he goes? He probably does, unless what? Unless he gets to someone who is really in a hurry, right? The last thing you would want if you were leaving with your family for a vacation, and this was happening on the morning you were supposed to leave, and you had your tickets, your plane, the last thing you would want is all this extra. Just get the thing fixed so I can leave. Do you think Alan would understand and react differently in that situation than he does in this situation? So now you're training people to play a part, to improvise in a way that's consistent with the character that they're playing. So you hire people to play the character, Alan, and you test them. Do they have this kind of humor? Can they improvise in a way that is in context with this experience, because the context is extremely important. Telling raucous jokes is not an Allen kind of a contribution of humor. And that example is a really good example because it shows two things. It shows the full dimension of an experience with all of the kinds of clues we're talking about. It shows the fact that you may have in your own organization people who are Allen-like in your bank or in your computer company. And if you do, and if they are uniquely successful, then why not codify the role that they play, not only in terms of the activities that they do for the customer, but the way in which they do it, the way in which they carry out that role. Why not, for example, create for your customer-facing representatives a role, a script that leads your customer toward an experience and a takeaway feeling of that's special. When these people call on us, and in IBM, that has really resonates. Because back when IBM in the 1960s and 70s were hiring, most of us, when we joined because we knew we were joining something special. It was special. You told somebody you're working for IBM, you were automatically looked at in a different way than you were before you told them that. So there is an enormous amount of leverage, not just with customers, but with other constituents like employees and vendors and partners that are candidates for a designed experience. So that's about as much as I think we can milk out of Allen this morning. Are there any other comments or observations that some of you would like to make? Greg?
It's more than just the people, because every organization has good people and every organization has people that don't measure up. I look at the difference between Southwest Airlines and some of the other airlines in the last 6 months we've all been challenged by the travel. It is the culture that gets built. It's a very different experience, and it's more than just the individuals being good people. It is somewhere between the training and the culture, but there seems to be a larger force at work that creates a better experience when you're dealing with one organization versus another. I'm not really sure how to get at this, but it's more than just I hire better people than they do, because I bring out more. It comes down to bringing out more from the people and getting them excited about bringing out more.
Well, you used the term culture. Talk a little bit more about what you think is that unnamed thing that causes a culture to arise. What gives a company a strong culture?
I think it's fun.
Fun?
Fun is a word people like to refer to. Enjoyable. It's not drudgery.
But the culture implies a certain consistency
Yes.
of behavior throughout the organization.
Yes.
How do you think that consistency arises?
Through systems. Not over-engineered systems, but some kind of a basis of the system.
With some kind of a consistent framework within which people carry out their activities, right? So when you think of training, ordinarily you think of training people in this is our products, here's our service, here's our markets, here, that kind of thing. Now we're suggesting you think of training in a set of humanics and a set of mechanics that have been tested and proven to have a maximal probability of eliciting that feeling. And now if you've got everybody organized and thinking around a motif of specialness or empathy or comfort, and Lou will take you through some of what clients of his have chosen. Now you've got a coalescing point around which people in different jobs in the organization can improvise themselves. If you're an insurance company and peace of mind, for example, is your motif, Do you think you'll operate differently if you're a claims adjuster than if the most profitable financial products and services is our integrating motif or integrating purpose? I personally have experienced exactly that kind of difference. If you're a, let's take the claims adjuster, and you think your business has as its purpose profitability, then how are you more likely to think of somebody who calls with a claim? As a potential fraud perpetrator, or as someone who really is in a bad situation and who needs all the help and understanding and empathy that they can get? Those kinds of differences are important differences, and a culture, I would claim, is realized by a consistent reaction by people throughout the organization, and that consistency comes from a common identification of why are we here? What is the value that we're producing for the customer? And so everybody who relates with a customer, no matter what their job is, if they think empathy is the nature of that relationship, will improvise in different ways, but come up with that same kind of consistent relationship with a customer. Chuck, were you going to?
Yeah, I use the word claim in an insurance sense. The claim by definition is something that we're trying to perpetrate onto that organization, and they're going to make a decision on whether they're going to recognize it or not. So yeah, we are guilty. Insurance companies don't like claims.
Yeah, and that
lots of things in place to keep you from making them.
I neglected to mention, Chuck will be talking to us tomorrow about little words that make a difference in an experience. And the choice of words turns out to be enormously important in terms of what kind of a feeling it evokes. And therefore, when you create and design a role, much of what you'll do is help people with their vocabulary. And Chuck is going to talk about some very interesting work that he's done with clients to sharpen up their vocabulary. Robert.
Steve, this may be an unfair question for you.
Good.
Is Alan a product of the training at Roto-Rooter, or is he just a unique individual? And do they clone him? And then they try to understand his value and try to reproduce?
That's a really, really good and fair question. Anybody else? Anybody here a Roto-Rooter customer? Lou, is Alan a unique, self-invented, or is he part of a systematic approach?
Totally unique and self-invented.
Yeah. Because Roto-Rooter doesn't think they're. As a matter of fact, Alan is in his own business. He is a service that they contract to. Roto-Rooter thinks themselves as being in the snake business and using these distribution channels to get utilization and sales of their snakes. And that's where a lot of us, so that's this bolt-on idea of we're going to bolt on the service and the experience in order to sell more and more of the product. Madeline, you were going to? Lila?
So the Roto-Rooter or the snake itself is a commodity. And what Eric makes it a unique experience, that he differentiates himself.
Well, actually, it is even more interesting than that, because the snake, in their case, is not a commodity. They've got a patent. There's a snake that can cut through tree roots. That's what really differentiated them. That's what got their investors to put up money. Claudio?
But on this point, if you want to sell an experience, you should be good solving the basic problem.
Absolutely.
And this is what is the basic tool of this guy. He has this tool that he can solve the functional problems to the clients. Solving this, he has the opportunity to give something special. So in every business, you need this kind of snake or airplane, food, buildings, decoration, etc.
And that is this idea of holistic. The snake is, their snake is a superior snake, okay? So the product does lends to a better service because it has more functionality. The service is therefore improved, not only because they can get at more, solve more problems with it, but because Allen has added on these timeliness and clean up afterwards and feed the dog and all of those things. So the service is designed to be special. The product is special, the service is special, and then all of these Allen-esque humanics and mechanics add to that specialness. And the really amazing thing is that a 3-minute clip off of CNN captures that holistic design and the holistic nature of that experience so well. But the issue that Bob brought up, is that unique or is that systematic, is exactly the key issue. Because I'll bet every organization in here can find an Allen or something close to an Allen if you started to look for it. But then what would you do if you found one? How would you institutionalize that? That's what makes this a business issue. That's what makes this an investment issue, and that's what makes this a management issue. Yes?
Isn't the piece though to his question in the back that the reason why they wanted to call Allen, if you'd never met Allen, was that the Roto-Rooter brand? And so the brand over time versus independent plumbers in a marketplace where I have no semblance of what they bring to the table gave me a sense of trust. And what Allen did was deliver on that trust. And so Roto-Rooter evolved from the commodity of where the product was king to now evolve their positioning of trust through a bolt-on experience, because consumers today don't care about what the product is, they want the thing fixed.
The Roto-Rooter brand is squarely on the service, that your drains get clean. The question is how much of what the brand Roto-Rooter is, it differs from the brand of Allen. And if Allen walked and went with another company, how many of his clients would follow the Allen brand versus the Roto-Rooter brand? Yes?
The other way I was thinking about it as you were describing that is, out of how many calls does the unique capability of this Roto-Rooter device make the difference? I mean, probably they're not going through trees every time they unclog a drain, and it still is going to wind up being more about the service and the experience than about this unique capability of this device.
That's a good point. Other observations? Chuck?
I just wanted to pick up on the Roto-Rooter issue because Roto-Rooter happens to be in Des Moines, Iowa corporate headquarters. So I took that clip that you were so kind to give me.
Oh, geez.
And I asked them about it. They had not a clue. They didn't even know in corporate headquarters that that was on CNN. And they didn't know about Allen. They had to go find out about Allen.
Really? Okay, Bob, there's, I think, your answer. Well, yeah, it's scary, but how many, you ask, how many of you think you have Allens in your company? How many of you can name them? Much less replicate them. Yeah, Bruce.
The thing that I'm wrestling with is with humanic aspects of this. If you're trying to do this, and if you're trying to scale, how do you determine what, which aspects of humanics are feasible to scale? You know, you could, because you could, for example, give someone a list of the best practices of Allen, and customers would get unnerved because someone else couldn't pull off, I'm singing, I'm telling jokes. All they know how to do is that one job.
Oh,
and so what do you do?
You asked, I heard two questions in there. The first question is how do you scale this thing? And that is really what Lou's going to be talking about, because that's what he really has done, is take a Disney approach and generalize it for business. The second is, how do you, if you run across somebody who is really good at cleaning drains, but has no sense of humor, as a matter of fact, is kind of gruff, do you hire that person? Do you hire that person? Do you? Oh, you can? You can teach people humor.
There are companies that have proven
All right.
If
If you can do that, if you can create the kind of persona that can improvise using humor, the equivalent of singing, and is empathetic. I don't know how you teach empathy, but if you can teach it, then God bless, do it. But if you find that this person is very good at the service, but not good at the humanics, what we're suggesting is nothing less than you don't hire them if you can't train them. Because it is the experience more than the service that will determine your customer's reaction to your business. Louis, do you want to make a point?
Just on the concept of training, the distinction is educating. And there's a huge distinction between educating and training. And one of the projects we did with GM and Cadillac, Stanley Marcus was part of that group. And Stanley Marcus made the comment that you train animals and you educate people. And the critical aspect of building a culture is you cannot train a culture. The culture evolves through education, if you think of the historical progression of the way cultures evolve. So it's really critical to understand the distinction between those two things in building an experience management system and working with humanics, that you cannot train humor. You can educate people. You cannot train empathy. To really get the kind of natural flow in an organization to be able to sense and respond in a way that creates these outcomes requires educating people on a much, much larger scale.
I really appreciate that question, because I think that's critical to getting at the real meaning of the statement, that the experience is much, much more in terms of the value created than the sum of the product and service attributes. And if you don't buy that, then you won't make the investments to select as well as educate and train people in the total experience. It's a really, really important intellectual chasm to jump over, because once you buy into it, then you're in Disney World. And then it absolutely makes all the sense in the world to hire people to play the key role in Disney World, which is Mickey, and tell them, never open your mouth while you're in that uniform. Never. And the reason is why? Why do you think that nobody in a Mickey Mouse uniform or costume at Disneyland is allowed to open their mouth? Different voices. What does that do to Disney's value proposition for your 6 or 8-year-old? It destroys the enchantment, right? It's gone right there. So these things are really, really important, and they require a lot of management to get the training, to get the education, and to select the kind of people, and to design the experience. Dan?
Some room for training. I just came back from Orlando, my wife and I, and we were at Epcot and in MGM. And we encountered 2 or 3 individuals that were working there, that were housekeepers picking up garbage and stuff like that. And they happened to notice that we were looking at the map and all. Their English wasn't that good. They just came up and asked, can we help? They didn't have a lot of the humanics around them and anything. They just asked, can I help? I think that was more a function of training than it was of educating. So you're not going to train you're not going to educate your whole workforce, and you're not going to hire everybody to fit all these roles. But there are some of them that with just some training to observe certain things going on, you can help improve the experience.
Everybody has to be educated in what is the motif Everybody has to be educated in what are the roles that they play. And people have to be trained on executing the service and understanding how to use the equipment and what to do if there's a health emergency. I mean, that kind of stuff does take place. The key is, are you integrating that training, that education, that service, and that product in a holistic way so that the net takeaway feeling is the design feeling that you've set up as your special. There we go. This is it again. The service function, clean the drain. The emotional clues, the humor, the cleanliness, the smell. The product function, cut through the root. All have to be aligned to produce the motif. Now the motif is our design point. Key thing, even though we kind of get sloppy in the use of our language around it, is you cannot deliver an experience. You can only deliver the signals that have maximum probability of evoking the experience, because the experience is fundamentally subjective. And the same thing that will work for you, the thing that works for you today may not work for you tomorrow. If you had a particularly bad day, or your car's just broken down, or you've got your stomach is upset, so the same kind of humor and so won't work tomorrow. So this has to be adaptive. It has to be a set of responses to what you see in the moment, and those responses need to be case by case, tailored to the customer, so that the customer has a maximum probability of experiencing what you have set out as your preference-creating, distinguished experience. So, yes, Claudio.
How do you manage different groups of customers, different segments?
How do you manage? Yeah, every customer is not the same.
For example, in a bank, you have, I work with some banks, and they have different kind of customers. They have, for example, they differentiate the customers based on the income level and the profit of the bank.
Yep.
And how do you manage this different people that they will go? Do you have for sure, you have that they will meet at the same time at a branch, maybe?
That's a very good question, and a lot of it will be answered by Lou and by others. But in a nutshell, one of the ways you differentiate by customers, like they do at Disney, is to let the customers build their own experience. Provide an environment where the customer can decide to go here or go there. Another way is to hire the kind of people who can adapt well to the 65-year-old grandmother and the 6-year-old grandchild, and create different clues on the spot. And a third way is to design, as Lou, I think, will talk, well, he will if we ask the question of him. How do you, for example, in a Buick dealership that shares with Pontiac the same physical preference, how do you create a different experience for the Buick customer than you do for the Pontiac people, and still make it a consistent experience from the General Motors point of view? And then the final one is the traditional way of thinking about the management of customization. How modular do you make the experience so that you can snap parts of the experience together in different ways to create a different kind of experience? So let me summarize what we've talked about today in these terms. The total experience determines future customer behavior more than the performance of the products and the service. 2, organizations always give customers a total experience, willy-nilly. 3, Therefore, businesses should systematically design and create their value propositions as total experiences. And finally, the reason that we've asked you to come here is we know a way of doing this. And we know probably multiple ways in this group that's here today. And that's what we're here to do, is learn from each other and from people who have developed the methods and who have implemented the methods, so that we can all leave here with a much higher probability of being able to implement a preference-creating experience for our own companies. That brings us to 10 o'clock and a break, which is a necessary part of the experience. We found that dynamic fluid balancing is extremely important as a service function here. So we will be back about 20 after and start the next part of the program with Lou Carbone, who will talk about how we do this. Thank you.
Steve, thank you very much. Very kind. Thank you. Well, it's a hard build-up to follow and to live up to. But the one thing I can assure you is that I have a passion for what I'll be talking about, and I really enjoy it. And I hope that you share that passion and the excitement for this whole space as we go through this. What I'd like to talk about is what happens when you begin to get clued into experience as a value proposition and how it begins to change your life. It's an insatiable thirst for learning more about experiences and human behavior and the way people formulate their preferences. And it's something that once I got clued into that value proposition, the passion that I had for what does this mean and how can I learn more just becomes all-consuming. And I think that as a business world, we are beginning to discover the experience as a value proposition. And I'm beginning to see signs of passion and desire to know more, that we know that below the surface, that below the earth, there's a richness to be mined in terms of understanding this. And I've been in pursuit of this for many years, and I'll talk about what my learning has been and share that with you in terms of what I've learned in dedicating the better part of my life to learning more about experiences, experience management systems, and how those things come together. I'd like to start by talking about waking up and as the world is beginning to understand this value proposition and is beginning to wake up and sort of smell the coffee, I'd like to use an example that Joe Pine and Jim Gilmore use in their book, which is The Experience Economy. Joe was actually on the faculty here at ABI when I first met Steve and met Joe back 10 years ago. And what's really fascinating is that Joe talks about the economic value of coffee, starting with the commodity, which is the coffee bean. Relatively inexpensive, not much value there. And that's where someone sells it for probably, or buys the plants that create the beans. And I don't know what the cost of a coffee plant is, but I can assure you it's probably under $1. And when you take that and now begin to move that into, take that commodity product and add a service, which is actually kind of roasting the coffee and move it up in the value chain, you've added value to where now these roasted beans have taken on added economic value. As we move up through that roasting process and now begin to add additional service or an additional element to that value chain, and we brew it and add water, the cost has now risen to somewhere around $1.50. And as we move it up another notch, We're now up to about $3, $3.25, and there are actually people who are card-carrying Starbucks devotees. It's actually a debit card for Starbucks. And in fact, I spoke at one group, and I start off with this example, and one of the gentlemen said he had just gone through credit counseling with someone who worked for him, and they found out that his administrative assistant was spending about 10% of her income on Starbucks coffee. And that was one of the first adjustments after they had tracked what she was spending on a weekly basis. So this is a chart that Pine actually uses to demonstrate how that value rises from under $1 to where the real boost and what customers are willing to pay when you wrap it around experience begins to move it up into a much higher range in terms of economic offerings. With that as a background, the one thing that Steve had also pointed out in talking about product, service, and experience is the challenge I'd like to lay out for each of you, sort of a homework assignment that on the last day, if each of you could think about your own business, and just as we talked about the Roto-Rooter machine, and as we talked about the service of cleaning the drain and the experience being one of delight or of being special, think about your own business. And we do a thing which is an experience optimization exercise that really deals with, and one of the problems that we have with many organizations is they can't even create that single distinction to begin with. And yet they're talking about working with the customer experience. So I just put that out as an interesting thought that I think there's real value to be derived if when you leave, you've at least answered that question in terms of being able to distinguish that. That's the beginning of creating this common language or this system that begins to get at experience. What I'd like to do is I'm going to go through the background, kind of talk about experiences in general, and sort of my journey through experiences and share some of the learning and the insights, some of it just observational and humorous, some of it with deep study that I've done into various companies and various approaches that have been taken in experience. I then would like to talk a little bit about experience management systems, because delivering experiences, designing experiences are one thing, managing them and being able to create that experience across an entire enterprise and leverage that value a la Disney and a la some other organizations that we've studied. I'd like to share those insights with you. And then when we begin to look at this 21st century management discipline of experience management systems, what are the tools? What are the tools that we have? And why are new tools necessary, and how do they fold into what we're working with? Steve, back in 1993, we developed a curriculum and a course here at ABI and wrote an article in the very beginning of Steve's. If Steve had not kind of discovered me, I don't want to say feel like Marilyn Monroe at the drugstore, but had Steve not been at had Steve not been at the American Management Association, I think that by the way business has gone, that experience was going to come of its own at some point in time, and it was something that I identified way back. But I don't know whether I would have had a prominent role in the development or being there if it wasn't for Steve, because in those days I would talk about experience, and as Steve said, I would get these strange looks like I was smoking the drapes, and it was a look like, what planet and where is this guy coming from? And if it wasn't for Steve recognizing the value and where that was all headed, I wouldn't be here today. So I want to thank Steve and ABI for having identified experience management as a 21st century management discipline and something that would be impacting the way that we look at business. So as we begin to look at this and begin to say, well, who is it that has had systems that have worked toward this holistic experiential value proposition? And I would say that the most highly evolved species on the face of the earth in terms of an experience management system to date, and I think that what we're going to see evolve as the future goes forward will make Disney look like the prehistoric dinosaurs in the experience management business as we begin to learn from that. But you have to go back and learn. But I think that what we can see is that Disney, Walt Disney World, and I want to make that very clear, that it is not Disney as an organization, although Eisner will say that, that it's the magic throughout. The perfection and the magic was never transformed to retail and some of the other ventures that Disney went into. In fact, a lot of the Disney retail outlets are closing because what happened is Disney just brought its brand to retail and did not Disneyfy and create an experience in retail that was truly a distinctive economic offering. What they did was brought decent customer service and some of the other stuff. And what that began to tell me is that Disney itself is unaware of the mother lode that they've been sitting on. And I shouldn't say that begins to tell me that. It's something I've known for 20 years, is that Disney has not really fully understood the value of what they have had in the mind of this absolute genius, Walt Disney, in the way that he brought this to fruition. The other organization that is working off of an experiential value proposition is undoubtedly Harley-Davidson. And there are some markers that you look for in organizations that are able to do that. One of them, and a question that someone asked earlier, is how do you begin to segment and deal with markets of one-to-one and people that are different? And I would maintain that organizations with an extraordinarily good sense of an experience management system and some of the markers understand pattern recognition as well as understanding distinction and differentiation. And I think that as we go into the world of segmentation, we begin to lose the value of understanding what there is in pattern recognition. So that's another element of what I think is really extraordinarily critical as we begin to look at this whole space, because I actually had the opportunity to speak to a Harley owners group. And to speak to that group, I had to go through 3 different hoops, including attending a Harley hog rally in Greenville, Pennsylvania, and ride down Main Street on a Harley. And one of the things in that whole experience that was really an awakening for me was I expected to be with a group of Hell's Angels type people, and I'm gassing up with a friend of mine at a Mobil station, and the CEO of Mobil is there gassing up his Harley. So my whole impression of, again, this concept of being able to serve multiple customers with an experience that's embedded with clues that meets a hugely differentiated and distinctive offering is enormous. And if you begin to look at Disney, it's that same concept. All you have to do is stand at the main gate of Disney and watch the diversity of customers coming through each day. Another organization that I think I've been very fortunate to be exposed to through some work with Len Berry is the Mayo Clinic. And again, here's an organization that has a diverse customer set, but they've got markers that create what is this distinctive Mayo experience that fulfills people on more than a rational basis in terms of what it's providing as a holistic experiential value proposition. The other thing is if you look at those 3 examples, there are dollars involved. I remember when my first work with Disney back many years ago, we were pricing a program, and the concept was that the pricing was too low. We need to maintain arrogance in pricing, was the expression that was used. And you begin to look at that opportunity to create those dollars and the economic value that's demonstrated by Pine. And it's of little wonder why there's so much interest in experience today, but it's also of little wonder why there's so much confusion as to what we really mean when we're talking about customer experience and the customer experience and the experiential value proposition. One of the primary principles that is underlying that is anyone familiar with Skyline Chili? It's in Cincinnati, and it's an addictive experience. And in fact, what began to fascinate me is we did some preliminary meetings and some work with Skyline years ago, is that people actually had a Skyline Chili restaurant that they preferred over other restaurants and would drive by 3 other Skyline Chili units to get to the one. It's sort of the principle of your local as a pub in England, where you have your local that you go to. Became very fascinated by trying to understand that you can create such extraordinary bonding and preference experientially that people will go out of their way to come to you. Now, you all probably have a restaurant or have a grocery store, an automobile dealer, that you will go out of the way to visit. That you will go out of your way, you'll pass, maybe even pass a grocery store of the same brand to get to the other grocery store, because the experience makes you feel different. And it's trying to understand those feelings that we developed what we call an experiential preference model that tries to get at an understanding of how do we begin to understand the zone that goes beyond the commodity zone. And this came out of a lot of frustrations with organizations that felt that they were in this commodity business. I was dealing with American Tourister luggage at one point in my history as in advertising. And they said, we're in a commodity business. What the hell can we do? Can we put the handles on the inside of bags to make them different? And I began to realize that there were these commodity cop-outs going on everywhere. Almost every client you'd meet with was, we're in a commodity business, all we can do is compete on price. So you begin to realize that that commodity cop-out and all of the quality programs and everything were just moving us into an area of acceptance with very little differentiation. And there wasn't a lot of design work and a lot of real concentration and focus on what is it that creates this preferential bond that has people drive by 2 Skyline Chili's to get to the 3rd. Understanding the dynamics of that and understanding the experiential value in that is what began to really fascinate me in that whole area. But what really touched it off was somewhere in the period from 1977 to 1980, I was working with an organization. Now, some of you may be aware of Howard Johnson's and others may not. But at that time, Howard Johnson was about 6 months away from being sold to the Imperial Group in London. And I had the distinction of working on a number of different pieces of business, and I would fly up to Boston to be at Howard Johnson's for a meeting on a Tuesday. And we're at Howard Johnson's, and it's in the final days of Howard Johnson's. And they had all these icons. They had orange roofs. They had all these things that were extraordinary. And I began to watch the vision of Howard Johnson Sr. as it moved to his son, who took the company over and now started to get all sorts of cost reduction programs and savings into the organization to become the low-cost producer because they were in a commodity business. And I began to look at this and understood in bewilderment as I would sit in meetings, and they'd be talking about how do we change the thickness of a straw, and how much money can we save doing that, and how much can we save by making the straws shorter. How much money can we save by going from a 4-ply napkin to a 2-ply napkin? So I would leave these meetings somewhat depressed, and I would fly down to Orlando, where I was working with another organization. That organization happened to be the Disney company. And I'd leave a place where we're taking everything that had any value of any sense in the experience and throwing it overboard. And I'm going to another organization where we're sitting there and we're talking about, okay, there's all this stuff happening, we're working on all these things, and it was at the time that Epcot Center was being built. And I've had clients, Progressive Auto Insurance and some other folks, who went to Disney and said, but that's entertainment, that's the castle, that's Fantasyland, that's all that stuff. And yes, it is. But underneath it all, there are other pieces that deal with customer experience and this sensitivity to the customer experience. And one of them being, we're there and they're telling me, you know, we just figured out what the temperature of the ice cream's going to be. And I'm like, what? We figured out the temperature of the ice cream and what it needs to be so it won't melt in a customer's hand. You know what it feels like when an ice cream bar melts in your hand and the mess that it creates on the ground and kids, and it would ruin someone's whole vacation. And I said, that's not entertainment. That's a real sensitivity for the experience that the customer is going to have. And that's where my passion to say, the people who come here to learn and then leave and say, well, we can't do anything with this because it's not our business, it's the entertainment business. It's the philosophy, it's the beautiful underpinnings of this system. and this way of seeing the world that Disney is the first person to really cash in on experiential value propositions built this system. And as you begin to look at it and then understand, my God, this is such a rich area to be in because we can even pump the smell of chocolate chip cookies out onto Main Street. It's like the whiteboard that we've been dealing with that we call this commodity zone that most businesses were caught on was a whiteboard about the size of a foot by 1 foot versus a drive-in theater screen or a huge whiteboard. And when you begin to look at the opportunity that's presented, it became extraordinarily exciting. When you take a look at the vision that Walt Disney had flying into Orlando and realizing the ability to now move from what he had learned in Anaheim and now have this opportunity to have an even bigger whiteboard to begin to create experiences on, the power of experiences and experience management systems become extraordinarily fascinating. Len Berry at Texas A&M, who wrote the book The Soul of Customer Service, says that marketing communications help build the brand, but nothing is more powerful than customer experiences. You see a number of quotes around the room. You see the experience economy. You see experiential marketing. There is a lot of stuff happening in this space. There's a lot of opportunity that we're just on the periphery of. And what I want to share with you today is that deeper look into what is it that all this noise, all these signals that we're seeing that are talking about experience today really mean for us going forward in the future and what the opportunities are going forward. So it really starts with one basic understanding, and that is that the atomic structure of experiences is experience clues. And I always have a great deal of fun, and I can never get these clues out of my presentation, although everyone says there's so much other rich stuff. When you open your eyes and begin to look at experiences differently and understand how we process these clues and these signals, it's very powerful. And there's a gentleman at the Harvard Business School, Jerry Zaltman, who talks about how these things begin to change your perception. And we've been dealing with Jerry thanks to having met Jerry through Steve almost 10 years ago in this whole space that Jerry's been working with and working in conjunction with him on a number of different projects and different things and kind of soulmates on this journey. One of the areas of study that Jerry has been very much involved with is brain science and how we perceive things, and that perception is reality. And in one of our projects with Avis on the wall, it says, perception is reality in the boardroom that they had, and that is so true. Here are 2 lines, and just by adding 2 simple clues to each of those lines, I can change your perception of what you thought you saw there in those lines. And one of them probably looks like it's longer than the other. And that's the way our brains work. We're taking these clues, these signals, our brains are processing them, and they're saying, this line is longer than the other. And I can actually have any one of you come up, and I don't know whether we have a tape measure, but you could measure them and you'll see that they're exactly the same. You'll sit down and people will still say, but one line is longer than the other, because perception becomes reality, and the way that these clues impact us and the way that we process them, both on a conscious and unconscious level, become the way that we begin to put these experiences together. So let's take a look at a few clues in different places. Is there anything in this photograph that looks unusual to anyone? Anyone want to venture a guess as to where this is? Yes?
Looks like Disney wrote with the science card on it.
It is Disney. Very, very good. It's the back of the signs, because at Disney, they acknowledge that people see signs 360 degrees, and that they actually finish the backs of every one of the signs. Now, you may not leave there going, my God, every sign at Disney is, however, it enhances the whole feeling of attention to detail. Now, there are not many companies that go to the level of understanding how customers process signals. Generally, people don't guess, Bruce, that that's Disney until they see this one. And then it's, it's Disney, that's where it is. There's no other sign I could probably hold up that has no words on it that could be identified with a place. But let's look at the way that they handle some of these other clues. These signs, I will point out, are also finished 360 degrees. Many companies would say, let's not spend the money because we don't want to finish the backs of signs that are facing the woods. But Disney understands that Bambi may come out of the woods and they want Bambi to have that same experience. Disney has managed that customer waiting experience as no other organization, and I know that there are a lot of organizations, including airports, in terms of the concept of waiting and dealing with the anatomy of understanding waiting that have worked with them. But look at the language they use, exit only please. I mean, the language has a whole thing, and Chuck will talk about that and the power of language as language works. Most other organizations would have do not enter. We probably would put this big red circle with the line going through and do the whole deal. Textile services. I mean, do you feel like your clothing and things are going to be treated differently at textile services versus the laundry? And when we talked about how do you orchestrate people feeling different, this is all part of an experience management system. How do we orchestrate an organization creating a different, if we just called it a laundry, how could we create employees that are doing laundry differently than anyone else? It's all part of a system. It's all part of the way that it comes together. It's all part of the way that it's designed. How do we get a trash can back to where it's supposed to be? It's color keyed. How do we begin to get real sense of detail in terms of delineating surfaces so that that sense of detail is everywhere in everything we see, that enhances the feeling that if they're taking care of these details, they're taking care of all these other details that are important to me. Now, let's take a look at a hotel room that I stayed in once. And on the pillow, anybody familiar with Inspector McGruff? You'll see a little thing on the pillow here. And what it is safety tips, traveler safety tips that they had put on the pillow for me at night. And it said, take a bite out of crime. If you see any suspicious activity, report the observations to management, what to do in case of a fire, and all this wonderful stuff. And I could see an attorney or someone saying, you know, we got to get these things in the room. There was a fire in Las Vegas. There are fires here and there. We've got liability. And all of a sudden, without an experienced management system, where does it end up? It ends up on your pillow. Now, there's another organization that puts something different on your pillow. They'll actually leave something for you to order breakfast the next morning. Now, I've got to tell you, I'm an anxious person. When I go to bed at night and someone's warning me about a fire, I feel very differently than someone who's willing to bet that I'm going to be alive in the morning and will actually cook breakfast for me in advance. Now, it's not a conscious thing, but it is something that is impacting me in the way that I feel in that room. Now, there are other elements in these rooms, and I think hotel rooms have made great strides in creating experiences. This is what I call the roll of toilet paper. Now, this conjures up an experience. We've all had it, and there's also a feeling of what that experience would be like. But as we move to the next step here, this experience feels different. And what happens when that experience becomes commoditized, and this is where I say the commodity cop-out is something that you cannot accept. Because when we run out of this and everybody else is doing the toilet paper triangle, and I know that each of you now and have been, you won't stay somewhere without a toilet paper triangle. You feel a little uneasy. I do. Well, what do you do after that? You go to the triple trifold ruffle on top of the toilet paper. Now, when that becomes a commodity, what do we do next? We put an orchid on the toilet paper. What I'm saying is that if you're into experience design and understand that what you can do, clues are limitless in terms of what we can do with clues. The feeling here. The feeling here. Different. Now, somewhere, someone got the idea of making towel swans. Now, this is where not having an experience management system leads to having extraordinary inefficiencies. Because there's a group of people in housekeeping at this hotel making swans. Is there any value in what the swan adds to the room? No. Because someone had a great idea, and this is where not having an experience management system that begins to say, this is important, this builds on a motif, And no, this isn't a place that has a swan or no relationship to a swan in any way. But someone had a brilliant idea. They were out to dinner one night, and they asked for leftovers, and they got a foil swan. And they said, wouldn't it be great to make towel swans? And they went back, and now there are towel swans in the rooms. Dan?
I've seen your presentation before. I went on a cruise to Nova Scotia out of New York last August actually. And the housekeepers every day had a different animal on the bed made out of the towels. They were all running out. It was 4 couples were all running out of the room to see which animal.
What's the latest animal? The animal du jour. So it gets really interesting as you begin to become more experience aware. I stayed at a hotel in Seattle. We've been doing a number of conferences for a group of community colleges that are into continuous improvement. We've done 2 so far out in Seattle, and got a 3rd one coming up. And the first trip out there, I had not been to a hotel of this particular variety for a while. And my first experience there was quite memorable, and I wasn't quite sure what it was that was just neat, but I felt very different about this chain that I had avoided. And I kept going to where they were making my breakfast in the morning at the Hyatt, and I kind of stayed away from this place. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, you know, I really felt good. This trip was better than what my trips to this chain had been. So I finished up a talk in Minneapolis and flying out to Seattle. And midway through the flight, after having been up all night the night before preparing my talk, I'm craving this bed at the hotel. And I'm like, God, I can't wait to get there and just get into that bed. And this was the bed. And it is the heavenly bed at the Westin. And it's can't come to the door right now, I'm in heaven. Now, when we talk about the commodity cop-out, there was probably someone who was a CEO, I'm sure, because no one else could force an organization to do something like that and say, I want the bed experience to be differentiated. Now, other than supplying company or doing all sorts of other things, the organization was limited in terms of what it could do. So what they end up doing is taking that bed and actually creating an experience. The success was so great that it now moves to the heavenly bath. Now, I've always heard that 2 heads are better than 1. And this is the 2-headed shower at the heavenly shower at the Westin Hotel. And you actually even get instructions on how to use the heavenly shower. Now, if a shower can be differentiated, if you can create an experience around a shower and begin to build preference, you can create an experience around anything. And I think the other thing that's exciting is one of the great innovations I implore you all to try, because we've all been in a hotel room where we've done the shower curtain dance, where it's like, stay away from me. It's like the shower curtain has this magnetic effect that wants to cling to your wet body. And what they did is actually bowed the shower curtain out. Just a slight variation in angle, and it's like, oh my God, I'm not being attacked by the shower. It's absolutely amazing. So you begin to look at these opportunities. You begin to look at the way Barnes & Noble created and redefined the way that books are sold with experiential clues. The ability to put clues into a retail environment where people would wait, where people would sit. It was unheard of. And Bill, when we did our project, you probably remember there was a retail expert that said, this is the most inefficient method of checking people out of here. But when you look at it, if we went to a Target-style checkout, the whole feeling would be different. But take a look at the clues. The last time I remember seeing lamps like that was when I was in a library, or I spent a lot of time, I will confess, in my youth, in high school, daydreaming. I believe you all find that hard to believe, right? But I mean, only I would stare at these type of lights for as long as I did. But those are the kinds of fixtures that you'd find in the educational environment. And then you end up with what I call the problem of benchmarking and the homogeneity of experience. There was a period of time where everybody wanted to build a Starbucks wherever they were. And Bill, you would admit that if we put a Starbucks in a dealership, people aren't going to be coming in just for the coffee, that there are opportunities to have coffee, but the ability to have people drive in and take concepts like this and say, well, it worked for Barnes & Noble, let's put it here, let's put it there. And what I admire is when organizations will understand the dynamics of what's happening, but realize that you just can't pick up a Starbucks and put it in every environment all across the country because it worked in one situation. And I think what I fear at times with benchmarking is this concept of what I call the homogeneity of experience, that we're only going to have one basic experience because people are not applying enough creative firepower to understanding the reality of what experiences are all about. Steve talked about the different categories of clues. The other thing about clues that Steve mentioned is that we basically take all that stuff in through our senses. What we see, hear, taste, touch, and feel, and smell. So what I maintain is that there's this clue bombardment, that when I call into a call center to buy a product, I'm being bombarded by clues, the tone of voice, the words that people are using, the quality of the connection. All of these things are random, and in some organizations, some of them are more random than others. So that leads to the concept of experience management systems. And what has been fascinating in the work in the area that we've been working in is understanding that the what we do is what we refer to as experience design. And that's been going on forever. There is nothing new in designing experiences in terms of saying, and there are people that come from all walks of life, all persuasions, all sorts of things that will come from design firms, advertising firms, and will say, what we've been doing is designing experiences and doing this what? The real critical factor is, the real magic is not only in the what you do, but the how you do it in the experience management system that's put in place. So let's take a look at what we mean by an experience management system. And an experience management system has the potential to focus different parts of an organization on the common goal of creating an integrated, aligned customer experience. This results in stronger preference, greater loyalty, and less price elasticity. My work years ago grew out of advertising, branding. I did the global branding for 3M in the mag media area, which was the first global branding project that they had taken on. And I realized that there were huge shortcomings in where traditional branding thought had come from to getting to an experiential value proposition, because it kept going back to communications, kept going back to permanent media. And there was this breakdown in terms of how to move it into the behavioral and cultural aspects of an organization. And that's where the richness is. That's where the real magic takes place. This is a CEO I know who is dealing with experiences. And this is the nightmare that CEOs are faced with today. Here we have CRM, we have branding, we have all of these programs that are all around us. And we're saying, how can we work these up into value for the customer? And each one of these little bundles of clothes have the magic to save the world. The difficulty is that most of these bundles of clothes were built out of product marketing perspectives and then later adapted to service. And what I implore us to do today is to make a commitment to not bastardize those tools any further and to realize, to capitalize on the experiential value proposition in its greatest capability requires rethinking what we're doing from the end frame of understanding we're creating customer experiences, what are the disciplines, what are the tools, and what do we need to do it. And I can guarantee you that you will have more streamlined operations and effectiveness. The bundles of clothing will be smaller, there will probably be fewer of them, and that the simplicity and elegance of experience management systems a la Disney are much less complex than the garbage that we're dealing with in corporate operations today trying to make this happen in a quasi-broken system. What an experience management system does is basically takes all that stuff off the floor and builds the system that it all hangs on in terms of creating that end frame, that feeling, and aligns it all. And it's amazing how much more efficient it becomes. And what experience management systems have is a whole language, which is the numbering system. Without that language that's differentiated, if we didn't have numbers and just had the spinning clothes, it would still be chaos. It'd be better than the bags on the floor, but it would still be chaos. But with the language of concepts like motif that change and shift the way that we traditionally would do branding or trying to do different things, begins to elevate the entire enterprise to an experiential value proposition. They can be designed. And what an experience management system does is it really begins with how people want to feel. The motif begins to create that commitment to what that feeling will be in that experience. And then the brand experience is how people actually feel it. People own the brand. We do not own the brand. Even though there are concepts of brand valuation, it's the people who are carrying the value around in their heads. It's the way they put all of the clues together that creates that brand value. And all we can affect is how we build those clues and build them in a preference zone that builds loyalty and less price elasticity. And an experience management system works at doing that. One of the ways that an experience management system starts to do that is by understanding that if clues are the atomic structure, how do we build the molecular structure of the organism? And how do all these pieces line up, both in terms of the way they occur over time and what they're comprised of? So let's look at some what we would call experience management principles. Anyone see some kind of image developing here? An experience management system connects emotionally. One of the primary requisites. The tangible attributes of a product or service have far less influence on the customer preference than the subconscious sensory and emotional elements derived by the total experience, as Steve had cited earlier. So to connect emotionally, you have to get beyond those things that customers can articulate into unarticulated needs and desires. And that's where our work with Jerry Zaltman has just been really exciting in terms of opening up new areas. The unique insights into customer needs then need to be turned into action. How do I begin to take action on that? Well, don't anyone leave the room now. Have any of you ever encountered this sign anywhere in your travels? Or anyone identify this? Krispy Kremes. Krispy Kreme donuts. Opened in Denver. There were traffic jams. 8,000 people on the first day. There's an article, and I'm going to have it copied for you, but there's an emotional connection that's created by a hot donut that when you compare that to the experience of a Dunkin' donut that's been sitting on the shelf for 4 hours, the zenith of decadence, when you're in a health environment and you're trying to do things for wellness and you avoid going out there and eating bad food, when you eat bad food, you want it to be really bad, but it makes you feel emotionally comfortable. Now, a warm donut feels very different and very distinctive. What's the economic value of a warm donut? 15 units. Someone did a calculation in this article on the back of a napkin, but if you own 15 units in Krispy Kreme, your profit on those 15 units last year was about $10.4 million, based on just a 20% margin. There are 217 stores, Krispy Kreme, versus 5,550 stores for Dunkin' Donuts. Average yearly sales at Krispy Kreme are 3.4 million versus 744,000. The number of donuts produced by Krispy Kreme, 2 billion versus 2.3 billion for Dunkin' Donuts. The sales growth, 12.8 versus 7.5. And just as a sideline, 200 calories per donut at Krispy Kreme and 180 at